The National People's Congress Standing Committee unanimously passes a national security law for Hong Kong. Demo Sisto disbands after Joshua Wong and 2 other activists stepped down from the pro-democracy group. And the US to bar defense exports to Hong Kong and will review other preferential treatment for the city.
Good evening and welcome. The National People's Congress Standing Committee has unanimously passed a sweeping national security law for Hong Kong. The legislation was then listed in Annex 3 to the Basic Law, though the full text of the law has yet to be made public. The Chief Executive welcomes the passage of the law, adding it will come into effect later today.
Among those who voted on the bill this morning was Tam Yu-chung, the city's sole member of the NPC Standing Committee. He told TVB that even some of the national security cases are to be heard at mainland courts in future, there will not be the death penalty. As the NPC Standing Committee wrapped up its 3-day meeting in Beijing, the national security law for Hong Kong was unanimously passed by the 162 members present. Speaking to the press after the meeting, Tam Yu-chung gave little away about the content of the law. Still, he said for cases over which the central government has retained its jurisdiction, even if the defendants are convicted after standing trial on the mainland, penalties will follow the new law and there won't be death penalty. He said that's because when the committee vetted the bill, members knew capital punishment no longer exists in Hong Kong. What about some of the most sensitive issues, the law's retroactivity and the availability of jury trials? Tam said the mechanisms are clearly stated in the law, and the matter of retroactivity has also been laid down on the law. He hopes the law will have a deterrent effect. Tam added, "We hope that troublemakers who actually engaged in these criminal activities in the past will be careful from now on, as they will have to bear criminal responsibilities if they commit such crimes again." The new law is expected to be gazetted later tonight. Sources say there is a delay because the law was drafted in Chinese. Therefore, mainland authorities need time to translate it into English before it can gazetted in Hong Kong. Here in Hong Kong, the Executive Council will hold a special meeting tomorrow morning to discuss the new legislation. Sources say the Chief Executive will hold a press conference tomorrow afternoon to talk about details of the law, such as enforcement issues.
The city's leader gave no response to requests from the pro-democracy camp and local media to speak about the new law. But at a video conference with the UN Human Rights Council this afternoon, Chief Executive Carrie Lam appeared much less reticent in touting the law's promises to Hong Kong. Jackie Lin reports.
A momentous law widely seen to have far-reaching repercussions on the city. But after Beijing's passage of the law, the CE's lips remained sealed.
And under which circumstances would the Central People's Government retain its jurisdiction? Well, sorry, as I said, at this point, it is inappropriate for me to comment on the Hong Kong national security law.
Meanwhile, Pan-Democrats called for an emergency Q&A session with the city's leader to discuss the law through LegCo President Andrew Leung. The CE has also given no responses so far. But in an online meeting with the UN Human Rights Council a few hours later, there's no more mincing of words.
I urge the international community to respect our country's right to safeguard national security and Hong Kong people's aspirations for stability and harmony.
Painting a rosy picture, Lam maintains the law will promise Hong Kongers stability and prosperity.
And upon implementation of the national security legislation, Hong Kong will ride out the political storm since last June and emerge stronger with stability restored. I and the Hong Kong SAR government are determined to provide Hong Kong people with brighter prospects.
She also vowed to continue the deep and positive relationship between the central government and the SAR. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
LegCo President Andrew Leung also welcomed the enactment of the new law.
The enactment of national security law in the Hong Kong SAR can safeguard Hong Kong's long-term stability and prosperity and protect, according to law, the rights and freedoms long enjoyed by the vast majority of law-abiding citizens. I hope the international community can understand that the legislative work will help ensure the social stability of Hong Kong and further strengthen the city's status as the international financial center.
The Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office issued a statement showing its support for the national security law. It says incorporating the law under the Annex 3 of the city's mini-constitution is a great milestone in fully implementing one country, two systems. Beijing's liaison office here in Hong Kong also joined in, saying it's confident the new law will lead the city from disorder and get it back under control.
Well, this afternoon, Beijing's liaison office also briefed local members of the National People's Congress and Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference on the new law.
Actually, it was a packed hall. I think I did not count, but it was well over 100 people were there. We reviewed and discussed the content of the necessity and why this law has been promulgated in such a short period of time. I think this is probably one of the more efficient law that's passed by the National People's Congress.
Various unions of the city's disciplinary forces have voiced their support for the passage of the legislation. 4 police officers' associations say violence has swept through Hong Kong over the past year. They say local terrorist acts have turned the Pearl of the Orient into an apparent national security loophole. They say the new law can better protect Hong Kong's future. The Association of Customs and Excise Service Officers and the Immigration Service Officers Association also joined in, noting that members will fulfill their duties to safeguard national security.
The national security law is having an immediate effect on Hong Kong's pro-democracy and localist movements. Just hours after Beijing endorsed the law, 3 local political groups announced their disbandment over the suspension of their operations. Demazisto founder and democracy activist Joshua Wong said it marks the end of Hong Kong that the world knew before. Haley Zhou has that story.
Beijing has repeatedly stressed the national security law is only aimed at a few troublemakers and will not affect the rights and freedoms enjoyed in Hong Kong. But fear is spreading fast that it will. Joshua Wong announced his departure from Demosisto, the pro-democracy group he founded in 2016. He earlier said he would be a prime target of the new law. Wong has rallied support for Hong Kong's democracy movement overseas and was labeled by Beijing a black hand of foreign forces. Co-founders Agnes Chow and Nathan Law also announced their withdrawal from the group. Chow said she would no longer engage in international outreach work. Law said nobody can predict the repercussions of the law, including his personal safety. Demosisto later announced it will be disbanded. With LegCo elections coming up, pan-democratic hopefuls fear they could be disqualified because of their affiliation or association with certain political groups or opposition to the national security law. Wong earlier expressed his intention to stand in the pro-democracy camp's primaries. Meanwhile, 2 groups advocating Hong Kong's independence, the Hong Kong National Front and the Student Localism, also announced they will end their operations in the city. Haley Zhou, TVB News.
Meanwhile, the United States is beginning to eliminate Hong Kong's special status as Beijing rolls out national security legislation for the city.
Some of the measures include curbs on military hardware and restricting the city's access to high-tech products. Tony Sabine reports.
The Trump administration says it will bar defense exports to Hong Kong and will soon require licenses for the sale of items to the SAR that have both civilian and military uses. Washington has warned for weeks that it would take action to end the special US trade and commercial preferences that Hong Kong has enjoyed since the handover. Among those perks was the ability for Hong Kong to import US defense equipment that China is not allowed to. Hong Kong was also able to import dual-use American tech items without getting licenses required for the same sales to mainland China. Before her weekly EXCO meeting today, Chief Executive Carrie Lam insisted the US penalties would not have a big impact.
What we're talking about now is possibly about the export of one type of commodities, that is military commodities or dual-use technology. We've done some assessment, and our assessment that we don't use a large number of such commodities. Probably the impact is minimal.
China, too, hit back with the foreign ministry pledging Beijing would take retaliatory measures against the United States. Both countries have already imposed visa restrictions on each other because of the security law. Other places also had their misgivings over the security law. In Tokyo, government officials called the legislation regrettable, saying it undermined credibility in one country, two systems. Japan's foreign minister said he shared the deep concern of the international community and the people of Hong Kong over the law. In Taiwan, the government there said the new law would severely impact freedom, democracy and human rights in Hong Kong, and warned its citizens that travelling to the city could become riskier in future. Others that have promised to act over the law include the European Parliament, which passed a resolution that the EU should take China to the International Court of Justice. The G7 group of industrialised nations also called on Beijing not to push ahead with the legislation. Tony Sabine, TVB News.
Still ahead on tonight's news, further easing of social distancing measures in Hong Kong. And long-delayed flight tests of the redesigned Boeing 737 MAX begin.
Welcome back to TVB News. More U.S. states and businesses are putting the brakes on plans to reopen their economies.
The rollbacks come amid record numbers of new coronavirus cases that experts blame on Americans who continue to ignore public health guidelines. Florida had a huge spike over the weekend, with the number of new cases reaching close to 18,000. Arizona, which reported the most cases in a single day, is also rolling back plans to reopen.
Today's executive order will pause the operation of bars, gyms, movie theaters, water parks, and tubing.
A spike in coronavirus infections in Texas is also alarming officials who call the rate of acceleration extreme.
We're in a race to the bottom with Phoenix and a couple of other cities, but things look very grim right now for the city of Houston.
Trump's vision for the future.
But at the White House, the president's position on wearing face masks remains the same.
It's the personal choice of any individual as to whether to wear a mask or not.
Trump has repeatedly chosen not to wear a mask during outings. The White House did not address the sharp spikes or record numbers of new cases occurring in several states. But aides did tout what they call encouraging COVID signs within the U.S., including a reduction in the number of fatalities caused by the virus. The European Union has announced a list of nations whose citizens will be allowed to enter 31 European countries. Americans are likely to be refused entry for at least another 2 weeks due to soaring coronavirus infections in the U.S. Meanwhile, Britain will impose a stringent lockdown on the city of Leicester, where there has been a flare-up of the novel coronavirus. In addition to the school closures, shops that don't sell essential goods such as food and medicines will have to close again in the city, barely 2 weeks after they reopened. The local outbreak had seen the city account for 10% of all positive cases in the country over the past week.
The city's social distancing measures will be further eased on Friday. Entertainment venues, including bars, cinemas, and nightclubs, will be allowed to open at 80% capacity, with required preventative measures like temperature checks. That also applies to religious activities. The ban on public gatherings of more than 50 remains in place for another 2 weeks. And the mandatory quarantine order for all inbound arrivals will be extended to August 7th. A 19-year-old student was sentenced to 10 months in prison for attacking a police officer with a selfie stick during an anti-extradition bill protest last year. Chen Yichun was arrested by police in North Point on September 15th. He resisted arrest and hit a police inspector 5 times with a selfie stick, causing injuries to his ankle. Chan suffered head injuries when he was subdued by 3 officers. The magistrate ruled Chan's injuries were not the result of the officer's excessive force, but self-inflicted by his violent resistance. He was convicted of 3 charges: assaulting a police officer, possessing an offensive weapon in a public place, and resisting arrest.
An elderly ex-police officer in the United States has confessed to being the notorious murderer known as the Golden State Killer. 74-year-old Joseph James D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 murders in California during the 1970s and 80s. He also admitted to dozens of other crimes, including rape and robbery. Under a deal with prosecutors, D'Angelo was spared the death penalty. He faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. The hearing was held in a ballroom to follow social distancing rules. Everyone was also required to wear facial coverings.
Legislators in the U.S. state of Mississippi have taken historic votes to remove a Confederate battle emblem from their state flag. It's the last state flag with the Confederate symbol that many people condemn as racist. Republican Governor Tate Reeves says he will sign the bill and the state flag will lose its official status as soon as he acts. On Saturday, the Mississippi House and Senate voted to suspend legislative deadlines and file a bill to change the flag. The change comes amid widespread protests over racial injustice. Legislators put the Confederate emblem on the Mississippi flag in 1894. The Ku Klux Klan and other hate groups have waved the rebel flag for decades. Boeing has begun a series of long-delayed flight tests of its redesigned 737 MAX jet with regulators at the controls. The aircraft manufacturer is hoping to win approval to fly the plane again after it was grounded worldwide following 2 deadly crashes in Ethiopia and Indonesia that killed 346 people. Pilots from the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration and Boeing did a high-speed system test and other maneuvers over 3 hours. More tests are planned for today and tomorrow. After the flights are completed, the FAA must analyze reams of test data and approve new pilot training procedures. Approval for the 737 MAX to resume commercial flights is not expected before September. And finally, a reminder about the State Council press conference on the national security law tomorrow at 10 a.m., which will be broadcast live on TVB Pearl. That's the news for tonight. Thanks for watching.
Good night.